No one owns the rivers poisoning Thailand. It isn't about China. It's about a stretch of territory so lawless that even the people demanding accountability aren't sure who they're demanding it from. What happens when the environmental source of a multi-province health crisis sits entirely inside a sovereign blind spot? Along the northern waterways of Thailand, communities are discovering that when the state apparatus completely breaks down across a border, traditional diplomacy offers zero protection against toxic runoff. Act 1. The Poisoned Waters of Ban Pha Tai. In the Lahu Christian community of Ban Pha Tai, nestled along the banks of the Kok River in Chiang Mai province, the water that once sustained village life has become a vector of disease. Salalipo, a 60-year-old resident, recently watched the cancellation of the community's traditional river baptism rituals after regional environmental authorities warned of hazardous heavy metal contamination. Direct contact with the river now produces severe skin lesions and intense itching. For Salah and more than 200 households here, the ecological degradation is paired with an immediate collapse of fishing incomes and an unsustainable spike in living costs. Families must now purchase bottled water, driving weekly household expenditures above 1,000 baht during the rainy season against the sub-5,000 baht monthly income. This localized crisis ignited a series of sharp diplomatic confrontations in early July 2026. On July 6th, approximately 30 activists from the People's Network to Protect the Kok, Sai Roak, and Mekong Rivers marched toward the Chinese Consulate General in Chiang Mai to submit a petition addressed to Chinese President Xi Jinping. The demonstration escalated into a physical confrontation when more than 100 Chiang Mai police officers barricaded the street, blocking the footpath and attempting to seize the group's banners. By July 8th, the protest movement expanded to Bangkok, with a coalition of environmental groups staging a demonstration outside the Chinese embassy on Ratchadaphisik Road. Mainstream media coverage has heavily framed these events as a direct bilateral dispute between Thailand and China. This framing is structurally incomplete. The protests represent a desperate attempt to force accountability onto an external superpower because the physical source of the pollution lies in a highly militarized conflict zone in Myanmar. The real story is an accountability vacuum. The mining that is poisoning 3 Thai provinces sits in territory controlled by armed non-state actors that answer to no functional state, leaving ASEAN mechanisms and diplomatic channels completely paralyzed. Act 2. The Autonomous Sovereignty Deficit. The geographical origin of this heavy metal pollution is located in the mountainous borderlands of eastern Shan State, Myanmar, which house the headwaters of the Kok, Sai, and Ruak rivers. To understand why these headwaters are entirely unregulated, one must examine the complex historical autonomy arrangements that govern Myanmar's ethnic peripheries. In 1989, the military regime in Yangon negotiated a series of ceasefires with armed ethnic factions that bypassed constitutional governance and established autonomous special regions. The United Wa State Army secured control over Special Region 2, while the National Democratic Alliance Army established control over Special Region 4 in the Mong La area. These armed groups were permitted to retain independent administrative structures and exercise de facto control over land concessions and resource extraction, operating essentially as parallel states within a state. The fragile status quo shattered following the February 2021 military coup d'etat in Myanmar. As the Central Military Junta faced a coordinated nationwide armed resistance, it suffered a near-total loss of physical access and administrative authority over the borderlands. To fund their war efforts and preserve their administrative autonomy, both junta-aligned militias and revolutionary ethnic armed organizations turned aggressively to unregulated resource extraction. In Eastern Shan State, the United Wa State Army and National Democratic Alliance Army seized upon their geographic isolation to rapidly scale up mining operations. Because no state actor exercises unified administrative authority over these specific border enclaves, the mining operators face zero regulatory constraints. Act 3. The Green Energy Paradox. The rapid acceleration of mining in Eastern Shan State is directly fueled by the global demand for rare earth elements and critical transition minerals. Elements such as dysprosium and terbium are critical for manufacturing the permanent magnets that power electric vehicles and smartphones. The global transition to renewable energy has thus created a profound environmental paradox where the decarbonization of wealthy economies drives the systemic toxification of Southeast Asia's transboundary river basins. China controls approximately 90% of the world's rare earth refining capacity. Over the past decade, Beijing enforced strict domestic environmental regulations, curtailing high-pollution domestic mining operations to maintain its global market dominance while protecting its own domestic ecosystems. China offshored the highly toxic raw extraction phase to the peripheral highlands of Myanmar. Between 2017 and 2024, Myanmar exported more than 290,000 tons of rare earth materials to China, with a total value exceeding $4.2 billion. In 2025 alone, China officially imported 36,000 metric tons of rare earth oxides and compounds valued at $944 million from Myanmar. The rapid proliferation of these mines is heavily documented in spatial datasets. According to satellite imagery analysis and remote sensing monitoring conducted by the Stimson Center's Southeast Asia program, there are 833 basin mines, including 86 rare earth sites. It is critical to explicitly flag this as a single source dataset because of active armed conflict and the highly militarized, closed nature of these territories. Independent ground-level scientific verification by the United Nations or Thai environmental authorities is physically impossible, creating a significant vulnerability in regional policy planning. The environmental devastation is a direct result of the extraction method, in-situ leaching. Operators clear native forest cover on mountaintops, drill a dense array of boreholes, and inject thousands of tons of highly hazardous acidic chemical solutions directly into the soil. This process generates up to 2,000 tons of toxic waste for every single ton of refined rare earth elements produced. Located in high-altitude catchment areas subject to heavy monsoon rainfall, these leaching solutions regularly overflow, seeping into groundwater tables and draining directly into the headwaters of the Kok, Sai, and Ruak rivers. Act 4. The Downstream Consequence Chain. Toxic legacy of Eastern Shan State's unregulated mining is carried downstream by transboundary river networks crossing directly into Chiang Mai and Chiang Rai provinces. Over the past 18 months, water quality assessments in the Sai River, which forms the physical border between Thailand and Myanmar, returned arsenic readings of 0.016 milligrams per liter, exceeding the strict public safety standard of 0.01 milligrams per liter. The most critical threat lies in the riverbed sediment. Heavy metals rapidly bind to suspended silt, settling into the riverbed where they undergo bioaccumulation. In April 2026, sediment sampling along the Mekong River mainstream at the Golden Triangle revealed a sediment arsenic range of 73 to 296 milligrams per kilogram against a 33 milligrams per kilogram threshold. This sediment acts as a persistent toxic reservoir that monsoon dynamics wash onto low-lying agricultural floodplains. The public health consequences are already manifesting in clinical data. A study conducted by Ban Pha Tai University tested school-aged children residing within the Kok River Basin, finding a urinary arsenic average of 40.24 micrograms per liter in children tested. Furthermore, clinical biological testing of a nail tissue cohort revealed 17.8% over the safe surveillance threshold for arsenic accumulation, indicating long-term biological absorption. Nearby, Sukjayana, a 75-year-old fisherman, reports a collapsing aquatic ecosystem filled with deformed, unsellable fish. Public panic has emptied local markets, causing his daily income to collapse to virtually zero. Total economic damage across the agricultural, fisheries, and tourism sectors reached 1.3 billion baht, or approximately $40 million by late 2025, and is projected to surpass 3 billion baht, or approximately $90 million by the decade's end. On April 21st, 2026, a coalition of 10 United Nations Special Rapporteurs issued a formal joint communication designated ALTHA-1 2026 to the governments of Thailand, China, and Myanmar's military junta. However, the Thai government failed to respond to the UN inquiries within the mandated 60-day timeframe. In response to mounting pressure, the Chinese embassy in Bangkok issued a public statement adopting a highly nuanced diplomatic stance, emphasizing its strict domestic regulations for Chinese enterprises operating overseas, while pointing to data showing some river sections met safety standards to argue that the crisis was being exaggerated by civic activists. Act 5. The Institutional Paralysis of ASEAN. This transboundary health crisis exposes a profound structural failure in the regional security and environmental governance architecture of Southeast Asia. Because the mining zones are located in highly contested border regions controlled by autonomous non-state armed groups that bypass central state authority, there is no functional state authority to hold accountable. If Thailand pressures the Myanmar military regime, the junta lacks the physical capability to enforce environmental laws in Shan State. Conversely, if Thailand or international bodies attempt to negotiate directly with de facto ethnic authorities, it would violate ASEAN's diplomatic protocols. The non-interference principle forces ASEAN to treat a multi-state public health crisis as a purely domestic issue, shielding the de facto armed actors from regional legal recourse. Existing river basin management frameworks offer no solution. The Mekong River Commission has tracked the contamination down the mainstream, but it lacks regulatory authority, and its jurisdiction is legally restricted to the lower Mekong Basin, which excludes Myanmar. The Langkang Mekong Cooperation Mechanism includes all riparian nations, but it is structured as a top-down, consensus-based development forum rather than an independent regulatory body. While Thailand and Myanmar serve as the immediate focus, the continuous discharge of toxic heavy metals flows directly into the Mekong mainstream, creating a cumulative hazard for millions of downstream stakeholders in Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Yet empirical long-term exposure data for Cambodia and Vietnam remains extremely thin, representing a critical blank spot in regional public health planning. Within Thailand, political finger-pointing dominates, with opposition politicians criticizing the National Environment Board for failing to place the heavy metal crisis on its formal policy agenda. Can regional architectures designed around state-to-state diplomacy ever resolve an ecological crisis driven by non-state conflict economies? Until regional frameworks evolve to permit independent transboundary environmental inspections and enforce strict mineral supply chain traceability, the rivers of the Golden Triangle will continue to carry the toxic cost of an unaccountable resource boom. The ASEAN angle covers Southeast Asia's biggest economic and policy stories, clearly, independently, without the noise. New episodes weekly on YouTube at the ASEAN Angle. Subscribe on Substack for the full written deep dive on every episode.